Hello, and welcome to another episode of my Type 35 build. Normally, I'm showing off stuff that's pretty noticeable all on its own. Chassis, body, suspension, big things that make you go, ooh. Today is all about tying up a bunch of loose ends. You know, the little things that make you go, ah. Like the wheels. When last we met them, it was with open-ended lug nuts and the hubs all exposed. That was step one. Opening the center bores up just large enough to fit over the hubs so I could install the wheels. Fast forward, and it's time for part two, because I want center caps. So, off come the wheels, and the bores were not only opened up to their final size to allow the center cap to fit through, but a groove was cut in the back side to accept the small flange that holds the center cap in place. All done entirely by hand. No CNC machine, no Bridgeport, just a steady grip and loads of determination. The lug nuts got replaced though. The shank diameter of the open nuts was too small, but to get lug nuts with the right diameter meant having a shank that was too long, which meant me and some 5/8 bar stock got to spend some time on the drill press, and out popped a full set of mag nut spacers. There's over an inch of thread engagement on the lugs, so that's not a worry. I just have to figure out how I want to match them to the wheel's final finish. But that'll be step 3. For now, let's move on to the lower radiator mount. Before, it was just a pair of tabs welded to the chassis holding the radiator and shell up while their position was being ironed out. But since the two of them are happy in their current location, I whittled down some 1/8" plate to cap the ends of the tabs and create the finished radiator mounting brackets. I think the radiuses really make them look snazzy. A lot more finished than a simple angle cut or some other boring shape. You can also see the headlight mounting tabs, which replace the C-clamps that had been holding the headlights in place. I cut and drilled some plate and rounded the nose because, why not, then welded them in place. The tabs set the headlights down a little low, so I'll have to talk them into standing up a bit taller because pretty soon there's going to be an apron wrapping around below them that they're going to need to clear. But it's looking good for now. And speaking of things that look good, after getting the fuel injection system mounted to the intake manifold, there were still a few things that needed attention. First was the original injector holes in the cylinder head. Mazda literally equipped the BP4W with port injection when they placed the fuel injectors in the cylinder head rather than the intake manifold, which meant the injector ports had to be capped. A set of expansion plugs and a little fuel-resistant gasket maker, and ta-da! Problem solved. Next up was the air cleaner. It might be a little premature, but it's such a fun little piece, I couldn't help myself. It's a bug dome for an early Weber or Stromberg style carburetor. Typically, the Type 35s ran without any air cleaner at all, but I thought this looked cool and, well, it keeps anything truly heinous from getting into the engine once it's roaring down the road. And it's one step closer to doing just that. If you recall, the throttle lever's hidden back under the throttle body in a really awkward position. So, I had to fabricate the linkage, bell crank, throttle arm, and shaft to rotate the accelerator pedal. Now, the linkage between the throttle lever and the bell crank needed to have a kink in it to clear the throttle body housing. So I took 2 stainless steel bolts, cut the heads off, and welded them together to create a double-ended linkage rod that looks like a tool-formed piece. The kink clears the injector housing at full throttle and rotates the stainless bell crank that's bolted to a bracket I whittled out of aluminum, which incidentally also helps to obscure the idle air control motor from view. The linkage from the bell crank back to the throttle arm is another stainless steel rod with cut-off bolt ends welded on each end, and the throttle arm was one half of a spoon pedal kit I bought, basically for the pedal itself. It attaches to a 3/8 stainless steel shaft that stretches across the firewall between two aluminum brackets I made. I think I might radius the edge of the mounting feet now that I look at them, but the pedal then attaches to the far side of the shaft and extends into the passenger's compartment through a slot in the firewall. I still have to trim down the throttle arm. The pivot point was moved down to match the motion ratios between the throttle lever and the accelerator pedal, but the whole arrangement looks pretty clean and throttle engagement is really smooth. What's really cool though are the rod ends on the linkages. Most of the hot rod shops about now stock pre-staked and gasketed joints that honestly look like they come from a hardware store, and not in a cool way. But these looked almost exactly like the ends used on the 35s back in the day, so there's no way I could pass them up. What else? Oh, the throttle pedal. Obviously I got it installed. And if we stick our heads down inside the footwell, we can see how the gas pedal lines up against the clutch and brake pedals. There's about 12 inches between the transmission and the frame, which is ample room to manipulate the pedals, but I staggered them. So the brake pedal sits 2 inches further back than the clutch, and the accelerator sits 2 inches further back than the brake. So now, rather than 12, you've got 16 inches of foot room. More than enough space to keep your toes from getting claustrophobic. Oh, and the ignition coil. It's still completely awesome poking through the dash like a magneto, but sans plug wires at the moment. The mock-up wires got removed because a new set of plug wires I had made to spec are on their way. And the last thing we have to look at is the fuel filler. Well, not the filler, that's the same, but the ring surrounding it that'll hold down the fuel filler boot. I carved a new one out of 1/8 inch aluminum plate. The old one I made out of 1/4 inch plate, and I really didn't like the way it looked. It was a little too chunky. Heavy looking, you know? The thinner ring looks a little lighter. I don't know. More svelte. Sure, it took me 2 times to get it right, but I am male, so at least I get there eventually.